Hello, everyone, and welcome to another wonderful week of tech writing. This is our third week, which is kind of the halfway mark of our semester, I guess. These shortened ones tend to go by quick. So we've kind of checked off our first two objectives, which were to become responsible consumers of technical writing during the first week, and then start to think about how we can produce technical writing in the second week. What I want to do this week is give you a little bit of a glimpse into the theory that people um, kind of behind the scenes in technical and professional writing work with, meaning the scholars, the professors, researchers. What kind of big, broad ideas are they having about technical writing? How are they articulating them? And then importantly, how we can apply them to the classroom, because that'll be what your assignments are this week. I'll ask you to kind of apply some of the ideas that you'll encounter here. And so the first such theory I wanted to go over with you is called the social justice turn. This phrase comes from an article by Jones, Moore, and Walton. I'll cite it down below in the YouTube comments. And I'll also post it for you if you want to check it out. But it's definitely just optional reading for this course, because we just don't have a lot of time. In a regular course, we might set aside a full day to talk about an article like this, because of how important it is. But you'll notice some familiar themes, some things we've been warming up to, and maybe a little bit of a new direction in this article. So its full title is Disrupting the Past to Disrupt the Future. And it was written in 2016. So it's almost 10 years old now, but it still is a really important article in technical and professional writing research. And maybe after I go over some of the most important details here, you'll see why. But they start off in a lot of ways the way that this course started off. They say the official narrative of our field indicates that TPC, which here stands for Technical and Professional Communication, is about practical problem solving, a pragmatic identity that values effectiveness. So I say you might have seen that in this course already, because we did talk about effective technical writing last week. And we did in the first week talk about how sometimes technical writing is seen as this coldly efficient, detached, neutral kind of writing. But we did start to break down that definition a little bit and start thinking about it in ways that technical writing surrounds us every day. And so that's when we think about technical writing in practice. But what they give us, Jones, Moore, and Walton, is a way to broaden the definition within the research. So within some of these essays that come out in various journals that scholars use. I mentioned them in the third lecture last week. We're not going to be able to get into a big research section just because of the shortened part of our course, but there is a ton of technical and professional communication research out there that is really incorporated into this course. And so what they say is what is needed, we argue, is an anti-narrative. An anti-narrative allows the work of the field to be re-seen, forges new paths forward, and emboldens the field's objectives to unabashedly embrace social justice and inclusivity as part of its core. And so they're using this word anti-narrative to mean kind of the reworking of fragmented stories into something maybe a little bit more recognizable. I think the roots of that word are probably before narrative, so looking back and trying to piece together what we've seen. And in their opinion, when they look back, I think they see that technical writing always sort of has had this social justice part of it, and probably even a little bit of inclusivity. But what they're saying here is it hasn't been a part of the core of the field. And that's the same thing as what I was talking about in the first week, where again, when we think about technical writing at its core, we think of this scientific, maybe dense writing that's just efficient and gets its point across. And as I said in the email out to the group this semester, yes, science writing is part of it, but again, just because it's science doesn't mean it's kind of the core of technical writing. These skills and methods can be used in a lot of different ways and toward a lot of different ends. And so what they want to point out in this article is that they see scholars across the field, meaning across technical writing in this case, who are committed to broadening opportunities for citizens, users, scholars, students, and participants. You can think here in your practice about the tailoring the syllabus assignment we did, and how when you go and tailor a document and put it maybe in a new format or use maybe different words, what you're doing is broadening the access of that document to different kinds of users, different kinds of students, participants, and so on. And again, they're talking a little bit more on the theoretical plane with research and journal articles and the methods we use to come around to certain conclusions, but we also see it in our practice a little bit as we've been working on in this class. And so again, they reiterate the dominant narratives of efficiency, technological expertise, and innovation infrastructure too often dominate the field and research projects where inclusion sits at the heart of the project. And so as you've heard me talk about a little bit, maybe in the discussions also, is that technical writing and technical communication can include things like website design, like app design, all these big kinds of innovative money-making enterprises, really. And so what she's saying what they are saying when they read the research is that, hey, we focus too much on these interesting, innovative, entrepreneurial kind of projects, or sometimes what's behind the project in the first case is maybe a social justice cause. And so they go back and they review the field. I'm just going to kind of tease out some of the big concepts that they worked with. With each of these, they cite some of the work that's already been done in these domains, but maybe hasn't become the core of technical and professional communication yet. And so they talk about feminism and gender studies. They also talk about race and ethnicity. Again, I'm not a full expert on the literature and the research the way they are, but these are some things we've started to use in our course, right? With like the tailor the syllabus assignment again, you have to think about who your user is, or who a student in a classroom is. If you're somebody like me, it's easy to think about a student as just like a regular kind of white guy who is in higher ed because that was always expected of him, and here he is. But in technical writing, it's so important to consider diverse audiences. So for somebody like me, am I taking the extra moment in my practice to think about women or minoritized groups who are in my class, whether it's racial, do they come from Black background, Latino background, or related to ethnicity and culture. And so these are all sort of things we need to consider about our participants and about our users, and we should be considering in our research that could change the field, because we start to see how what we do can be a kind of social justice work. And I hope maybe you saw that with the syllabus, right? If you included, to skip to the bottom here, if you included the accommodation statement, or you included language about the professor being accessible and available to their students, you are considering social justice work, and you're starting to do it. And some of these other ones in between, community and public engagement. This one, a lot of technical writers work within their communities, whether they're doing policy, procedure, whether they're working at a museum and writing descriptions of artifacts. This is all kind of technical writing work where you have to think again about who's out there, who's in my community, who's in my public, as we might say, who might be engaging with my materials. User advocacy is a kind of umbrella for this. Like, how do we situate users as experts sometimes? Again, I'm going back to the same assignment over and over, but tailoring the syllabus is kind of about that for me. I'm going to my students and saying, hey, if I really had to boil this down, what would you look at? And that's a way of thinking about user advocacy. I skipped over international and intercultural professional communication for now. We have a module later in the course where we'll go into some of the ways of thinking about that and dealing with your technical writing being accessible to everyone at all times these days. And so what they come around to is saying that these two concepts, inclusion and diversity, are central to technical and professional communication. They say ultimately inclusion, what we argue for in this text, is an ideal that we believe the field of TPC should work toward. And so what they're going to define here is inclusion. It means that there is respect for everyone's voices, stories, and knowledges. And diversity, which addresses representation in its most basic form, is a necessary precondition of inclusion. We have to get everyone to the table to be able to do the messy work of promoting and enacting social justice to create a more inclusive environment. And so diversity is kind of the means, starting to get people together, starting to get voices represented, and then inclusion is the ideal, where at that table, everyone's respected, everyone feels heard, their unique knowledges matter. And the bridge between inclusion and diversity in the minds of our authors here really is social justice. So how are we doing these practices? How are we doing these research projects every day, really, in our technical writing work that does social justice kinds of things, that includes more people, includes different ethnicities, different races, people of all kinds of abilities, and includes our communities, our publics, and so on. And so social justice is kind of the bridge between those two. To investigate social justice, they give us the 3 Ps. They ask us to consider positionality. Positionality is something I asked you about before. Are you understanding your identity as complex, dynamic, and contextual? Some examples we saw come up in the discussion on this included, like, am I a woman in STEM? Does that give me a unique positionality to this expertise that I have? And that can always change depending on, are you actually doing work in STEM and in different contexts? So that's how they kind of define positionality. Privilege is positionality that confers unearned advantages. So to go back to me, I'm sort of just your normal white guy professor, Irish backgrounds from right here in Delaware. And so, when you look at me, do you think about me as a leader, as a professor, without really investigating who I am and what my background is, which is why I kind of like to include the about the instructor part of the syllabus. But I see that you, a lot of you cut that section out, and that's okay. But again, just being your normal white guy who maybe doesn't get questioned very often about his authority, or about his knowledge on particular topics, that's unearned, right? That's just because of the way I look or maybe the way I present myself. And so that gives me a privileged personality. And then power is kind of the distribution of these things relative to privilege and positionality, and can go into abuses such as domination, exploitation, and subjectivity. And so again, am I considering this privilege I have? Am I using it for good work, like social justice work? Like getting people more involved in technical writing, getting us to think about audiences and users and all of their different backgrounds and races, ethnicities, abilities, and so on? Or am I using it to my own advantage, domination, exploitation, and subjugation, really? And I hope that you're finding it's kind of the first of those and not the latter. But yeah, just to kind of give you a quick summary of why I think this is important for our course is that we are expanding our definition of technical writing. We're trying to go beyond this coldly efficient, detached, neutral stuff. We already got thinking about how technical writing surrounds us every day. And I think with the theory that's out there, it's kind of time to start thinking about how does our position change technical writing in terms of how does it change how we consume technical writing? How does it change how we produce technical writing? We won't get to it in this course, but for Jones, Walton, and Moore, especially, how do we research technical writing? And so that's what I want you to start considering. I'll ask you a question pertaining to this in your discussion posts for this week. But yeah, how can technical writing start to be used to move forward social justice aims? And maybe you've encountered those in all different classes. Maybe you'll have to take a time to pause here and think about what social justice means to you. But that's our first big theoretical question for the week, and that's what I'll ask you to consider again in one of your discussions. So thanks, everyone, and yeah, I'll look forward to your comments. Thanks.